Now let's look at what's making news online and in old-fashioned newsprints. Browsing the papers and the websites for us today, Stuart Hughes from BBC News and Mark Hinge, MD of the Bay Public Affairs Company. Good morning, both.
Morning.
Good morning.
Mark, would you like to kick off?
Yes, good morning to you, Vaughan. Yeah, I've got a few stories here which I've picked up, and the first one's a story of puppies, pooches and purse strings. And there's a vet, you've probably not heard of him, John Burns, who's in Carmarthenshire, who's now one of the richest people in Wales, who started many moons ago with a food business with just 72 quid and a sack of brown rice, and he's now worth £24 million.
Wow.
And this kilt-wearing Scot, clearly a good businessman and a veterinarian, was worried about the diet of dogs, and he tried all sorts of things, acupuncture and so forth, and in the end he set up his own food business. Now, we've got our own dog. You're embarking in the background in a minute, who's on to venison, tripe, salmon and lamb, and tomorrow he's on beef, duck, liver, heart and pheasant, all with bone meal and some veg thrown in. So I suppose in some ways we unknowingly and unwittingly ended up feeding our good food to our good dog, as does John to his. But of course there's a serious side to all of this. Apart from the quality foods and being evangelical about diet, there's a matter of our own diets as well. And I guess in the last 100 days of lockdown, many of us have probably found that our summer clothes have shrunk somewhat in the wash. But of course the worst side of it is that of course there are lots of people are now buying dogs, so and the prices have gone up dramatically on it. So I suppose the moral of the story is don't overfeed and don't be fooled at buying overpriced dogs.
Thank you. Stuart, we managed to keep away from coronavirus there largely. I suspect we're not going to any for much longer.
No, it still features very prominently in the Sunday papers, as it has done for weeks or months, and I suspect there will be a lot of people waking up in England this morning with very sore heads, but at least they'll have very smart haircuts to show for it. The reason, of course, the easing of the lockdown rules yesterday in England, allowing pubs, restaurants, hairdressers and so on to reopen. Queasy like Sunday morning is the rather nice headline in the Daily Star on Sunday. But
I like that.
I find that the Mail on Sunday's front page splash is really frustrating. The day Britain smiled again is the headline. Ignores the fact, of course, that the new rules don't apply yet in Wales and Scotland. It's just one of those lazy England-centric headlines that could so easily have been avoided, and I think sort of doesn't really take into account the fact that the audiences live outside the south of England, and even within England the new freedoms aren't universal. Leicester's under local lockdown, and writing in the Mail on Sunday, community leader Manzoor Moghal explains why he thinks the city is still so badly affected by COVID-19. He says the city has an estimated 1,000 garment factories, which he says could accurately be described as sweatshops. Social distancing rules impossible, employees forced to continue working even when they're showing signs of the virus. And the Sunday Times also focuses on the rag trade in Leicester, saying that workers in the city making clothes destined for the fashion company Boohoo are being paid as little as £3.50 an hour. The Sunday Times has investigated
that's illegal,
one fact.
Isn't it?
It is illegal. Of course it's illegal, but a lot of these workers, mainly from places like Bangladesh, are in the grey economy and are forced to take any money, any pay they can because of their immigration status. The former Labour MP, Mary Cree, who's campaigned on the issue of modern slavery, says fashionistas need to realise behind perfect Instagram feeds, workers face illegally low pay and dangerous conditions. So one thing that coronavirus has exposed, as if we need reminding of it, is the social divisions within Britain, and it seems the poorest members of society appear to be paying the highest price.
Indeed. It's a great piece of journalism by the Sunday Times. Mark, what else have you seen?
Well, I'm going to stay on the coronavirus business as well, and I'm going to talk about the weather, not the liquid sunshine that trickles from the clouds, but whether you do or whether you don't go down to the pub in the aptly named newspaper The Sun, and there's an interesting but perhaps not unexpected story. Headlines: Boozy Super Saturday revellers have emerged worse for wear after the pubs reopened yesterday, and in fact some of the watering holes were forced to close early across the other side of Offa's Dyke due to major public disorder as thousands of thirsty Brits poured onto the streets from pubs which have been shut for the past 104 days, as if we've been counting. And apparently some 15 million pints were sunk yesterday as the lockdowns were eased. Now, of course, in England, they've opened the bars. It's different here in Wales. But I've seen some pictures of recently installed and very public, with no screens, urinals outside in London. And curiously, there's no hand-washing facilities. So that raises a number of questions. But also, it raised a very serious question about licensing laws. Now, the licensing laws stem back to the 1800s, and they were put in place to keep brawls off the streets and to give some control over consumption. Now, of course, people are encouraged to go onto the streets, and publicans, of course, have responsibilities, but only on their own premises, and they don't have responsibilities for their clients out on the pavements. So the question is, who does? Is it the local authority? Is it the police? And looking at some of the pictures in London, it's not really the rose-covered country pub scenes. It's mass brawl and alcohol.
Well, we could do with that, I should think. Stuart, what else have you seen?
Yeah, here in London, I've got to say, just picking up on what Mark was saying, I've got you to thank, actually, here in London for avoiding the newfound freedoms, because an early start needs a clear head, so I managed to avoid the pubs yesterday, especially the pubs of Soho. But on other stories, one thing the coronavirus pandemic has done is focus the minds of foreign policy experts on China's role in the world. China is becoming a hot domestic political issue, as well, as you've been discussing with Simon Campbell. And a couple of the Sundays have been briefed on Huawei's 5G technology. The Sunday Telegraph has the most comprehensive report about this, saying the Prime Minister's poised to begin phasing out the use of Huawei technology in Britain's 5G network as soon as it can, in what it calls a major about turn. The Sunday Telegraph says the intelligence agency GCHQ's revised its previous assurance that the risks posed by Huawei can be managed. And a report presented to Boris Johnson, due to be presented to Boris Johnson this week, concludes that US sanctions on Huawei will force the company to use untrusted technology that could make risks impossible to control. Says US sanctions have had a severe impact. Back in January, the government decided to allow Huawei to build parts of the 5G network, but it seems because so much has changed since then, that decision is now about to be overturned. And those of us who work in foreign affairs have been writing about China's influence for quite some time, but it's generally been something of a niche issue that doesn't often break through into the wider news agenda. But as we emerge from the coronavirus pandemic, I think that's going to change. China's going to be a country that many people are going to be watching much more closely.
Mark?
Well, I've chatted about animals, now let's talk about children. The Wales on Sunday.
Never work with animals or children.
Or political consultants as well. The Wales on Sunday's got a really good story about Dr. Raja Biswas. Now, he is a hospital consultant in the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, who himself actually caught coronavirus, and he believes that the risk now is really quite low if people follow the precautions of washing hands and social distancing, except if you're using a urinal in Soho, I guess. But what he is concerned about is about the children. And he wants them to go back to school in September because his own daughter is obviously feeling the pangs of not being around with her friends. And it's not, I guess, in some ways about, as I think back to my days in school of the 60s and 70s, where it was mortarboards, gowns and grammar teaching Latin. But it was more about kids, conkers and chewing gum, I guess. And as I am as a grandfather, worried about the resilience of these young children growing up. Of course, Dr. Raja Biswas was the guy who struck on the idea of wearing a photograph of himself on his PPE gown so patients knew what he looked like. And I suppose in some ways, maybe some of the on-table wait-in service now within pubs will probably do the same. Otherwise, you'll end up being served by somebody who looks like Darth Vader, I guess.
We have time for one brief story, Stuart.
Yeah, very quick one. As we begin to reconnect with our families and friends, I'm going to finish with a quote that proves that some enmities won't be wiped away by lockdown. Comes from the Sunday Times Quotes of the Week, addressing the issue of redrawing parliamentary constituencies across county lines. The MP for Elmet and Rothwell in West Yorkshire, Alex Shelbrooke, says, "If God had wanted Yorkshire and Lancashire to meet, he wouldn't have put a huge lump of granite between us. It's going to take more than a small matter of a global pandemic to erase that rivalry."
My Auntie Nesta from Durham always said, if God had wanted us to cook, he wouldn't have made Marks and Spencer's. Thank you both very much indeed. You can listen again to this programme on the BBC Sounds app for music, radio and podcasts. And if you want advance notice of our guests, follow @Wales Politics on Twitter. There's more Welsh politics on BBC One today with Politics Wales, and that's at 10:15 this morning. After the news is All Things Considered. This has been Sunday Supplement. Bore da chi.